Hey guys, Paul here on APS Amplifier. Today I'm going to talk about an aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! Card design today that I honestly don't like. And maybe you guys can relate. So it's not, the typical stuff that people complain about with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Right? Everybody doesn't like floodgates. People don't really like huge combo decks and unbreakable boards. It's not going to be that actually. It's the fact that I think decks have gotten a little bit too invasive on the opponent's territory. So what do I mean by that? Well, I was thinking about kind of just the top decks of the last, 6 months, even like the last year, and I've noticed a bit of a trend. A lot of strategies now interact with your opponent in ways that are uniquely invasive, I suppose. I don't know. Like, I'll just give an example. So the Ishizu Terror Elements deck, it is not, currently really a thing in the meta, but when it was, not all that long ago, the Ishizu cards mill from both players' decks. And this is kind of useful for the Tier Elements deck, right? They get extra mills, which means, more searches, more fusion summons, all of that. But for the opponent, it's extremely disruptive because, you are losing potential engine pieces. And just in case you thought that maybe you'd mill a card to the graveyard that could be useful for your strategy and your opponent just helped you out in accident, nope, because we've got things like Mudora that can actually shuffle your cards back in. And so I kind of find it to be like a level of disruption that we haven't seen quite before. We also have, another example of that might be the bestial monsters, where, they summon by banishing a light or a dark monster from either graveyard. So your opponent can use them with their own cards, sure, they can also use them with yours. And it just kind of feels like, just really pervasive, like they're just getting to make their plays off of your cards. It just feels a little weird. And then I was thinking about, well, Kashtira also kind of has an element of this, with things like Diablosis and Kashtira Unicorn and these sorts of things that just get into your opponent's, they banish your opponent's cards from their deck face down, or their extra deck more specifically face down. It feels like, your opponent is getting to reach in and get knowledge of your entire strategy that just previously didn't feel like it was the case. And so between all of those things, it kind of feels like Yu-Gi-Oh's gotten to be a more invasive game, where the opponent just gets to, play on your turn and see things that they just didn't normally get to see. This is sounding weird when I think about it. But the point is, I think that it can kind of make Yu-Gi-Oh a little unpleasant to play. I don't like the Ishizu cards, and I really don't think that they probably should have been made either. But I think if they only milled your opponent's deck, then I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it. It's the fact that they also mill my deck and ruin my engine and my ratios. It's the fact that the Kashtira deck forces people to run multiple copies of cards in their extra deck, because when, one copy gets banished, sometimes that can shut down an entire engine. You know what I mean? And it also means Bestials kind of would discourage you from running light or dark monsters, because you might actually be enabling your opponent's plays. And then we get into also the kind of phenomenon where people get to play more in the opponent's turn, I've noticed. So this has been a thing for a while, right? Hand traps have existed. I'm not complaining about those. But there are these archetypes that seem designed pretty much from the ground up to just play in your opponent's turn. Fluwanderies is one that a lot of people really didn't like, and they're gone now, more or less from the competitive scene, but still, it's kind of just something that I don't know, playing in your opponent's turn is it's rude. And then there's Tier Elements Havness. People didn't like that card. The Bestials, once again, are playing in your turn. And Kashtira, as we know, finishes locking up your zones, typically on your, on the beginning of your turn before you even get to your main phase. And there's something about that where it kind of feels like your turn isn't even yours anymore. And so I want to contrast all this by saying that these are, Yu-Gi-Oh! Exploring new territory that it has not explored before. And I want to give Konami props at least in that way, because they're always willing to kind of explore new avenues of how they can design an archetype's gimmick and mechanics. So we'll be nice and say that it's cool that the Ishizu cards kind of channel, what she did in the show, milling the opponent's graveyard and her graveyard, and then switching them around with Exchange of the Spirit and, that sort of thing. So it's cool that they're able to capture that element of her character and her strategy and stuff like that. But, when we throw that out the window, you realize the cards they're annoying. It's annoying, it's disruptive. Kashtira, locking zones and an archetype that's about locking zones that isn't, I guess, Ojama because that's so old, is kind of neat. But locking zones is like really, really like violating. I mean, like they're really taking the zones away from you. And then of course, the extra deck, it's cool to think about maybe being able to banish one of your opponent's resources from the extra deck because that's like an area that's not normally interacted with. But also the extra deck is like it's sort of supposed to be like this private thing that it's like your resource toolbox that your opponent just can never really get a chance to look at per se, and now you're having to like make more space for cards because like they might get like we've had Lithosagem do it in the past and it got banned pretty quickly, but I don't know, there's something about it. So there's good parts too, like the fact that, as decks go, Kashtira and Tier Elements and stuff, we're not actually like huge, long combo decks that make like unbreakable boards. They are, in a sense, kind of mid-range control decks. Listen, I'm trying to give them credit here. I know they're obnoxious to play against. But it's just that I don't really like that, these new cards almost just rob your opponent of, their resources from just weird places. Like, taking from your extra deck, taking from your own graveyard to make the plays, playing on your turn. It can be a little bit annoying. So, yeah. Is there a solution to it? I guess hit the cards on the ban list. I don't freaking know. But it's just something that I've been thinking about. I've noticed it can kind of make Yu-Gi-Oh! A little bit less pleasant to play. It's not even maybe the biggest issue in the game right now. I'm sure there are other things that people can talk about. And I'm not saying that it's like some reason to quit or that's killing the game. Not saying any of that. Just a thing I've noticed. So what do you guys think? Am I like making mountains out of molehills? Do you find that this degree of interaction is something that's like welcome or not? Oh, another one that I also left out is Runick. That kind of feels like it's the same thing. Plays in your turn, banishes cards off the top of your opponent's deck. Like, I didn't think a banish mill deck could be so brutal. I mean, Necrofaces existed, but Runick's kind of take it to another level, as we all know. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think about these decks. Do you find them to be, like, innovative and interesting, and so that's sort of that's the valid justification for them, Konami's pushing boundaries? Or do you think that maybe it's a little annoying having to build your deck with these sorts of threats in mind, or having to play no longer your turn, but rather our turn? It all just depends. Okay, so anyways, let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Fast turn.